So today, we're going to talk about a case that did more than just expose the evil of one man. It's a case that shook an entire nation to its core and forced it to look at the deep, deep flaws in its own justice system. This is the story of Marc Dutroux.
This is the man himself, Marc Dutroux. Back in the mid-90s, his name became shorthand for pure horror, not just in Belgium, but all across Europe. And while his crimes were absolutely monstrous, the story of how he was able to get away with them for so long is, in a lot of ways, just as disturbing. And that really brings us to the heart of the whole thing. I mean, yes, Dutroux was the monster who committed these acts. But his reign of terror was only possible because a system designed to stop people like him failed at pretty much every single turn. This is a story about a monster, for sure, but it's also a story of a catastrophic systemic collapse. To really understand how things got so bad in 1995, we've got to rewind the clock a bit, because the warning signs for Marc Dutroux, well, they weren't just there. They were practically screaming for attention for more than a decade. Just look at this timeline. You can see a clear and terrifying pattern. It starts with petty stuff, theft, drug dealing in the late 70s, but by 1985, he and his then-wife, Michelle Martin, are abducting and assaulting young women. He's finally caught and sentenced in 1989 to 13.5 years. Okay, so a dangerous man is off the streets. Or so you would think. And this is where the story takes an absolutely catastrophic turn. In 1992, Marc Dutroux is granted early release. He served less than a quarter of his sentence. And get this, the decision was made against the direct advice of both the public prosecutor and the prison psychiatrist, who had literally labeled him as extremely dangerous. This one single decision would go on to have the most devastating consequences imaginable. And that decision basically opened the door for the period that would make him infamous. Now that he was free again, Dutroux didn't waste any time getting back to his horrific activities, kicking off a series of kidnappings that would plunge the entire country into darkness. These are the names of his final victims: 2 8-year-olds, Julie and Melissa, taken together; teenagers Anne and Evesha, kidnapped just a couple of months later; and then the next year, Sabine and Letitia. 6 young lives, either completely shattered or just snuffed out by this one man. And this is what's so chilling. The level of planning. This wasn't some opportunistic crime. Dutroux had actually built a hidden, soundproof dungeon in the cellar of his house. It was a purpose-built torture chamber where he imprisoned, starved, and abused these girls. So the question is, how? How does a man with a known violent record get away with this for so long? Well, the answer isn't just about his own twisted cunning. It's about a series of shocking, almost unbelievable blunders by the very authorities who are supposed to be protecting these children. I mean, just look at this cascade of failures. At the time, Belgium had these rival police forces that often refused to even share information with each other. Dutroux's house was searched twice while Julie and Melissa were still alive inside, and both times the police missed the hidden cell. In one of those searches, officers literally heard the girls' voices and just dismissed them. It's a level of incompetence that is honestly hard to wrap your head around. And just when you think this story can't get any more absurd, it does. While he's in custody waiting for his trial, Dutroux manages to overpower a guard, steal his gun, and just walk right out of the courthouse. He was caught a few hours later, but the damage was done. The public was absolutely furious. That escape led directly to the resignations of both the Minister of Justice and the Chief of Police. This quote from Senator Anne-Marie Lisian just perfectly sums up what everyone in the country was thinking. The failures were so massive, so consistent, that people started to wonder, could this really just be incompetence? Or was there something more sinister going on? Was it corruption? Was somebody powerful protecting Marc Dutroux? Well, all that simmering anger and frustration finally boiled over. The people of Belgium, fed up with the investigation, fed up with the endless stream of failures, decided it was time to take a stand. 300,000. Just let that number sink in for a second. In October of 1996, 300,000 people flooded the streets of Brussels. And they weren't shouting. They marched in silence.
It was called the White March, for the color of innocence and hope. It became one of the biggest public demonstrations in the history of Belgium. It was this powerful, silent scream from an entire nation demanding justice for the victims. But more than that, they were demanding that the very system that failed them be torn down and rebuilt. so that something like this could never, ever happen again.
So eventually this all makes its way to a courtroom, and the case reaches its legal conclusion. But even after the verdicts came in, the story was nowhere near over. For so many people, the justice felt incomplete, and the darkest questions were still hanging in the air. So in 2004, here's how the trial wrapped up. Marc Dutroux, life in prison. His ex-wife and accomplice, Michelle Martin, she got 30 years. Another accomplice, Michel Liliev, got 25. And then there was this businessman, Michel Nihul. He was actually acquitted of the kidnapping charges, but got convicted for some unrelated drug stuff. The main players were sentenced, but that's not where the story ends.
Because for a lot of people, those convictions didn't bring any real closure. There are these deep suspicions that persist to this very day, this widespread belief that Dutroux wasn't just some lone wolf, but that he was part of a much bigger network, one that involved powerful people. And these theories are fueled by some really disturbing facts. Key evidence was supposedly ignored, witnesses who talked about elite parties were just dismissed, and most chilling of all, over 20 people connected to the case as potential witnesses died under mysterious circumstances before they could ever testify.
The Dutroux case is so much more than a story about one serial killer. It's this haunting, cautionary tale about what happens when the institutions we're supposed to trust to protect us just completely crumble under the weight of incompetence, rivalry, and maybe, just maybe, corruption. It forces all of us to ask a really terrifying question. When a monster is on the loose, but the system designed to stop him fails at every single step, who is truly to blame?